What does it feel like to be the richest man in the world for a day? Well, just ask Larry Ellison.
Veteran tech boss Larry Ellison, founder and top shareholder of software giant Oracle, has seen his net worth soar by $70 billion in one day. You heard that right. That's after Oracle reported surging revenues after the Wall Street bell, driven by AI demand for cloud computing. Mr. Ellison now has a net worth of $364 billion, according to Bloomberg's Billionaires Index, after the biggest one-day jump in wealth ever recorded.
Yes, earlier this month, on the back of a bunch of deals with AI giants like OpenAI and a boost in Oracle shares, Larry Ellison was made the richest man in the world. He's since been overtaken again by his good friend Elon Musk, but he's still sitting on £360 billion. So what does a man with that much money spend his cash on? Well, according to a new report by Peter Gagan and Lucas Armin, he's spent $250 million of that on Tony Blair. The extraordinary sum has been invested in the Tony Blair Institute, or TBI, which shares Ellison's commitment to persuading governments to adopt technological solutions to problems as diverse as climate change, healthcare, and illegal immigration. And Blair has, of course, long been obsessive about the modernizing power of technology, and Ellison has a more obvious financial interest in governments adopting tech solutions. His company makes billions in annual revenue, providing software and cloud computing services to government departments like the CIA and the UK Ministry of Defence. But what's Ellison's current obsession? Well, he appeared with Tony Blair earlier this year at the World Government Summit in Dubai.
The NHS in the UK has an incredible amount of population data, but it's fragmented. It's not easily accessible by these AI models. We have to take all of this data we have in our country and move it into a single, if you will, unified data platform. So we provide context. When we want to ask a question, we've provided that AI model with all the data they need to understand our country.
That was Ellison speaking in February this year. It's all very Dr. Evil with that background. But this was a major Tony Blair Institute publication a few months later, this August. So it's called Preparing the NHS for the AI Era, a digital health record for every citizen. In that report, the TBI found good reasons for building new digital health records with an existing system run by Oracle. It also said that using a system run by rival Palantir would be a controversial option, and that its product had been slow to make progress, in part due to opposition from data privacy groups. So it's not exactly subtle. So should this close connection between a tech billionaire and our former Prime Minister concern us? Well, earlier today, I spoke to one of the authors of that investigation, Peter Gagan.
The Tony Blair Institute, the thing to kind of remember about the Tony Blair Institute in some respects is it's kind of come from nothing to be probably the biggest think tank in Britain. This is an organization with a budget of 150 million, with staff of almost 900, active in over 40 countries. This is a big thing. It didn't exist in 2018, so it's a very big unit. And underneath that, what's funding it? A lot of that money comes from Larry Ellison. Larry Ellison has either given or pledged £257 million to the Tony Blair Institute. So this is really important for TBI Ellison. It's Ellison's personal foundation. So the money comes from Ellison's personal charitable foundation to TBI. And so it really is the kind of, this investigation was all about trying to understand what that money has done to TBI, trying to understand how and if it has changed TBI. And in many respects, I think it's fair to say we found that it has. But without Ellison's money, TBI would not be at the level of organisation it is today.
Our audience will be very familiar with Tony Blair. Some will be familiar with Larry Ellison, but he has been someone sort of in the background for quite a long time now. He's sort of suddenly come to prominence because he was very briefly the richest man in the world, also because talk of him taking over TikTok. He's a big supporter of Israel. But sort of in terms of your story, in terms of the relationship between Larry Ellison and the Tony Blair Institute, what should people know about this tech billionaire?
I think he's a fascinating character because, as you say, he is one of the kind of that clique of the tech billionaires that, the tech bros who could fit in the back of a taxi and rule the world. Larry Ellison is one of them. And most people, and I would actually say myself included until I started doing this work, I didn't know that much about it, I'll be honest with you. And I think most people don't. He's a kind of, some people, even older people, actually remember him as a name from the 90s. So he's been, unlike the Zuckerbergs of this world and Musk, he is actually somebody he's 81 years of age. He has a face that looks like a candle that's melted and somehow got stuck in this kind of orange hue. He's had this same pencil moustache for about 30 years. I think one thing that's really telling about Larry Ellison is the first biography of Ellison came out in 1997. And it's called What's the Difference Between Larry Ellison and God? And asterisk, God doesn't think he's Larry Ellison. This is somebody who for a long time has thought that they are a master of the universe and has lived and worked as if that is the case. He is phenomenally influential at this point, and especially since January of this year. Like, he's somebody who's given money to Democrats, he's given money to Republicans, given money to non-Trump Republicans, but now is firmly in the Trump tank. Trump has called him a CEO of everything. His son, David, is the head of Paramount, owns Paramount. Paramount, obviously, Trump gave the go-ahead for that for Skydance, them to merge Skydance. There's also talk now of them buying Warner Bros. As well. So he's emerging as a massive media mogul. He's very close. Elon Musk and him are kind of have been sparring partners, but also very close. Musk is not culturally dissimilar from Ellison in terms of how they see the world. I think that's quite important to see. This is not this is not somebody who doesn't have strong views. And one of the things that is so fascinating is one of the things he's got really strong views about is the National Health Service in Great Britain and its data, which I think is really telling. If someone who has this much money and this much power has, as he has done repeatedly, spoken about the NHS and its data, that shows you that there's something here that he really wants.
I suppose that's where, or the main issue where this relationship between Larry Ellison and Tony Blair and the Tony Blair Institute and the British government seems like it might be something that might matter to your average British citizen, which is that Tony Blair is lobbying for NHS data to be unified so it can be sold off to tech companies. Larry Ellison wants the NHS data to be unified so it can be sold essentially to him. And so he, it seems is lobbying via Tony Blair to the Labour government at the moment. I suppose talk about that, what you discovered, why people should care, I suppose.
So Tony Blair would say, and people who work for Tony Blair would say, look, Tony Blair really believes in this. He is a tech evangelist. He believes tech is going to save us. He thinks tech and AI are the things that are going to deliver what Labour wants in government, which is growth. And as soon as Labour got into power, Tony Blair was effectively, we have FOI responses, Freedom of Information Request responses, where he's meeting Peter Kyle, who actually used to be an advisor in Tony Blair's second term, who was the tech secretary for a long time, is now the business secretary. He's saying, look, you have to go for this. You have to go for growth. You have to go for AI. So Blair believes this stuff himself. I think that's fair to say. But at the same time, what he is pushing and what TBI are pushing is very beneficial to companies like Oracle, and frankly, almost certainly to Oracle. So Oracle has had over £1 billion with the UK government contracts. It's very involved in data and data centres and providing data services to the UK government. Ellison has spoken repeatedly about wanting the NHS data and why. And I'm not a tech reporter, so when I first started looking at this sort of story, it's a bit like NHS data, it sounds a bit geeky and it sounds a little bit like, what's really there? What's really fascinating, I only found this out really from talking to people who know a lot more about data than I do, is the NHS health data it's kind of like, Holy Grail is a cliche, but it is almost like this sort of mystical thing for big tech companies. Why? Because LLMs, large language models that power AI, they have now eaten everything. They've ripped off my books, they've ripped off lots of other people's books, they've pushed them into these AI machines, and they're running out of road. And so they want more data. And the NHS data is by far and away the most complete health data in the world. The only equivalent data, one expert told me, is veterans data in the US. Because veterans get free healthcare at point of use. Most countries in the developed world have a social insurance model, which is really different. So they don't have this sort of data. But veterans is by their very nature, that's not going to be as good a data set as an entire population of 60 million people dating back to 1948. So this data could allow huge, that's what the bet is. There could be huge opportunities to create new, to use this data to create pharmaceuticals, to use this data to create genomes, all sorts of other stuff, huge amount in private hands. So it's about taking this data in-house and using it. That's what Larry Ellison wants to do. He's talked about this. And Tony Blair Institute basically are very much been green-lighting this and pushing a very, very similar agenda. And it's what came out in our reporting a lot, both in the UK and internationally, was how since Larry Ellison's money started coming into TBI, so just remember, £257 million pledged or given to the Tony Blair Institute. Since that started coming in, the organisation TBI has become more and more focused on tech. It used to do lots of other stuff around good governance around the world, around de-radicalisation. It does some of that stuff still, but if you talk to people internally, it's really not the priority. It is now tech is the priority. And it is really pushing high-tech solutions and big tech. And often you're actually seeing, some people told us in the organisation that they felt as if the two organisations were as one. Oracle and TBI would meet together. They have retreats together. Oracle would slide into TBI staff calendars, organising meetings, even effectively doing tech sales for Oracle, especially internationally. So these two organisations have become increasingly kind of aligned. And what you've seen effectively is, briefly, the world's richest man earlier this month, Larry Ellison, he's effectively been able to, I think it's fair to say, to buy access to Blair, and in that way buy access to governments internationally and particularly in the UK, because the relationship between this Labour government and Tony Blair is pretty close. A lot of the people in senior government positions come through or have connections into New Labour, and as soon as they got into office, they were looking to TBI, and TBI was looking to them to be able to try and advise them on what they should be doing. And quite a number, we can see this, quite a number of proposals from TBI have subsequently been taken up as government policy.
I'm sure lots of people sort of listening to this will find this somewhat unsavory. You've got the world's sort of second richest man, very close to Donald Trump, who now has sort of, it seems, quite a lot of influence over the UK government. I suppose the argument from the other side to steelman the case would be to say, look, yes, obviously Larry Ellison wants to make a profit here. He's not doing this from the kindness of his heart. But the NHS, sort of the centralisation of the NHS comes with lots of disbenefits, lots of problems. One of the benefits is you have this brilliant data set and someone might as well use it. So if this brilliant data set can be used to create new drugs, new therapeutics, sort of help us understand the causes of disease, then it should be used to that end. Obviously, it would be great if that could be done in-house by the NHS. But let's face it, if we want this to be done well, the only organisations that have the capacity to properly use LLMs, who has the data centres to do it and the technical know-how, are these major private companies from the United States. So long as the NHS can get a good price for it, us selling our data to the highest bidder, and that highest bidder potentially being Larry Ellison, what's the problem?
In some ways, I kind of probably came to the story with a similar kind of mindset as well. Look, in some respects, yes, it might be unsavory, but what is the problem? It's striking. If you talk to people, the tech experts, and you talk to people in the space, they will tell you a very different story. They're really like, look, they will say to you, look, there's a lot you could do with this. There's a lot you could, the UK could benefit from this. And rather than flogging it off in a kind of privatized, like the last piece of family silverware that you could get rid of, we've got rid of everything else. We've privatized everything else. Well, we've got this thing left. Let's get rid of this. They will say it doesn't have to be like this. You don't have to lock yourselves into US tech. And actually in doing so, you create a massive security risk. And you can already see this. Like Trump and Ellison are very close. You can see the risk in where you have Donald Trump in the White House and the UK stays locked in to Oracle software. You're then in a very vulnerable position. So you're creating not just financial risk, but actually potentially national security risks. And one of my biggest issue in some ways, as I reported this story, was also, this is a conversation. I think Tony Blair in particular and the Tony Blair Institute, and I think Blair himself, have really pushed this idea. This all has to be done really quickly, as in far too quickly to have a conversation about it. And the story of Britain has been pushing through things like that really quickly without any conversation. And that hasn't been very successful for the last 30 years. And that is something I think, if nothing else, there needs to be a proper conversation about. Like, well, what are we doing here? What's going on? Who's benefiting and how is this working? And you can actually see in the policy papers that we've been able to get access through, where they're trying to craft messages, both government and TBI in consort, to kind of assuage the public who are quite fearful. People are right, I think, understandably concerned about data. They do care about it. And to try and say, look, this is all fine, this is all fine. But actually, I think that really speaks to the fact that it isn't, and there needs to be a much bigger conversation than one has been so far.
That was Peter Geoghegan talking about the cosy relationship between Larry Ellison and Tony Blair. You can read his full report on his Substack, Democracy for Sale. I really do recommend it. Really, really interesting. And there's also a version currently on The New Statesman. I'll read out a response from the Tony Blair Institute that was quoted by Peter in his article. So they say, "We don't advocate for technology solutions because we work with Oracle. We work with Oracle and other technology companies because we believe technology holds the key to the future. TBI is impartial when supporting government clients in technology delivery. The choice of technology provider is solely a government decision. And make of that what you will. Aaron, the figures here were just remarkable. Like when I was reading this story, £250 million given to one NGO by one billionaire. Like other think tanks, the IPPR or whatever, I think they have an annual turnover of 4 million or so. Did I say? But £250 million. It's next level, isn't it?
It is next level. I think the turnover of the Tony Blair Institute, or the political wing of Oracle, as I think we should call it, their turnover in 2023 was coming up to $150 million US. It's now $150 million US plus. You know, they are advising governments in 40 countries. They have more than 1,000 members of staff. This is orders of magnitude bigger than any kind of NGO or think tank we've ever seen in Britain. Orders of magnitude. You know, it's incomparable to Demos or Policy Exchange or the IPPR. These almost look naively childlike and sweet compared to the TBI. And that's really concerning. You know, it wasn't that long ago that people were saying Elon Musk, the world's wealthiest person, not a British national, he should not be interfering. By the way, I agree with this argument. I made this argument. He should not be interfering in the political process by giving £100 million to Reform or anybody on the right. And of course, he would be able to do that entirely legally by donating £100 million via a business holding here in the UK. That would be entirely legal. And people were saying, oh, that shouldn't happen. And at the time I was saying, well, hold on. What do you think about Larry Ellison and Oracle giving all this money to the Tony Blair Institute? By the way, if you've been to Labour Party conference recently, like last year, the only game in town was the Tony Blair Institute. The biggest panels, the biggest names, the biggest topics, all standing room only. Those events at Labour conference by the TBI. It was pretty clear it was the most influential organisation at that event. And as you've made clear, you know, $350 million US, £250 million are being given to that by a man who was briefly the world's wealthiest person on earth. But you have no problem with that. But you have a problem with Elon Musk giving £100 million to Reform. And there's a clear double standard there. This should not be happening. This should not be happening. The Tony Blair Institute, alongside Labour together, I think, are freewheeling policy for government in a way that is completely unaccountable, hasn't been done in this country ever before like this. And that will be a criticism increasingly you hear from the right. Guess what? It's correct. There was somebody in the comments earlier saying, after we did this piece, see, Aaron, now this is why you can't trust ID cards. I said in the first piece about ID cards, it's precisely why I don't support this idea, because it's being implemented by the Starmer government, which is in hock to the Tony Blair Institute, elite big tech interests like Oracle. I think other people might be involved as well. That's why I don't support it. But the reality is, I do believe in the state. I do believe the state is the corrective to our overarching corporate power. I'm a socialist. Right? I don't believe in a UBI, for instance. But if you think everybody needs a UBI, guess what? That's going to be quite a lot of bureaucracy. The state's going to have quite a lot of data on you. It needs that anyway for things like child benefit, JSA, pensions, all kinds of benefits. The NHS, to be effective, needs all kinds of data on you. Right? I have no problem with a socialist state in the abstract having access to all kinds of data that I would never want a private corporate entity to have. Right? But going back to this, Larry Ellison's relations as well to the IDF, you know, he was involved in fundraisers for the IDF. I think he's the biggest private fundraiser for the IDF in the United States as a private individual. His son, as was mentioned, has massive interests in regards to culture. They're involved in the purchase of TikTok as well. They'll be one of the holders of TikTok as an asset. So bad news. I think it says a lot that is wrong in the Anglosphere in regards to the deep relationships between business, big tech, and politics. And I think those connections should be severed. This idea that, Labour is the voice of the working class, they're the voice of organised Labour, who are in coalition with a wider range of interests, but that's how it's been for 100 years. We've got to fight for it. This is new, okay? This is new. Somebody worth $400 billion US, you know, one or two with regards to the world's wealthiest person, having a political wing, in my view, freewheeling policy where there is a massive interest for Oracle to be able to sell services in the future, but also to buy data in the future from the likes of the NHS, I think clearly it's just a huge conflict of interest. I mean, if there is a national ID card scheme and there's a ton of data that's bought with the ID card scheme, and you can imagine the data, right? There's 69 million people, 60 million plus have this ID card, or let's say 55 million plus have this ID card. It's geotagged, it knows where we go, it aligns with our purchases, it can just know absolutely everything about you. That is data Oracle is going to want. That is data third parties are going to want. Now, you said about AI and this data the NHS has being of huge value for LLMs, which, yeah, you know what? They could sort a lot of problems out. In the last few days, we've seen a potential cure for Huntington's, for instance, a gene therapy, extraordinary. And there'll be a lot more of that happening as a result of machine learning and big data being applied to medical research and innovation. But the point is, who's going to benefit from that? Which is why I would want that data to be publicly owned. I would want the research spin-offs to be publicly owned. Yes, they might be able to collaborate with other private sector actors. I think they would have to be British companies, right? So AstraZeneca, GlaxoSmithKline, for instance, two examples. They should not be working with US big tech, and they should not be selling our valuable data off to the world's wealthiest or second wealthiest person.
And they probably shouldn't be doing it on the advice of someone who is being paid hundreds of millions of pounds. Well, I suppose Tony Blair says he doesn't claim an income from the Tony Blair Institute, but let's say they shouldn't do it based on the advice of an institute taking hundreds of millions of pounds from an individual who could well be set to benefit from said policy.